Hi, how's it going? It's Michael Redmond here. Now, you may well know me as a stand-up comedian, which I actually was for over 30 years, or you might know me better as Father Stone from the Channel 4 sitcom Father Ted. And if that happens to be the case, and you're still wondering how I am after all these years, well, I'm still fine. So, what am I doing here? Well, I've kind of retired from stand-up, but I keep coming up with, the odd idea for a joke or a comedy monologue or a comedy routine and that kind of thing, because to be honest with you, I quickly realised that taking up gardening in retirement wasn't going to satisfy me enough. It wasn't going to do it for me. Jesus, gardening. And anyway, I don't have a garden, which is probably why I was often found standing in other people's gardens over the years. So what's this all about? Well, this is my comedy podcast, which I've called "What Are You Doing in My Garden?" I suppose the best way to describe it is it's a short weekly podcast in which I'll be, throwing in a joke or two or talking about a range of things from, say, drink driving in Ireland in the 1970s, my chance encounter with Joanna Lumley, pole vaulting geriatrics, and lots of other things. But no poetry. Absolutely no bloody poetry. So if you have anything to say or add to what I've been musing on the podcast, it'd be great to hear from you. Or in fact, also if you have any questions about Father Ted, I'd be happy to answer them as well. The email address for the podcast is whatdoyoudoinmygarden@gmail.com. How you doing? How's it going? Welcome to episode 13, and we're recording this on a nice, uncharacteristically sunny day in Glasgow. It's even clammy, believe it or not. So episode 13, I'll be dealing mostly with, I've mentioned it before, my 2 days filming so far with a Netflix series, which I'll be talking about in greater detail later on in the podcast. Well, not too later on, in a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. And I had a really brilliant time, but I'll tell you all about it when we come to it. So I hope you're all enjoying the podcast. I mean, I'm really enjoying it. It's I say we started about 3 months ago, but I'm beginning to get the feel of it, I think, and I'm really enjoying it. I hope you are too. But before we get into the sort of the nitty gritty of this episode, I'm sure you're all sitting on the edge of your seats, waiting to hear the result of who won the Ally McCoist I Got a Say competition. As you know, sort of I put out a competition that whoever guessed the right amount of times Ally McCoist would say "I got a say" throughout his entire commentary during the Euros. God, it seems like a long time ago now. The Euros, it's only was it 2 weeks ago? It seems like a long time ago. But we couldn't put the result out on the last episode because we recorded it about before the England-Spain match, so I didn't know what the result was. So, are you ready to hear the winner? It is SLT Newbie. Now, the number of times Ally McCoist said "I got to say" was 30, and none of you guessed the exact amount, which doesn't really matter. But SLT Newbie guessed 27, which is the closest. And I think it'd be a bit, even though he or she didn't get the correct amount, it'd be a bit sort of churlish not to give him or her a signed copy of my book, Eamon, Older Brother of Jesus. Now, if you're unfortunate enough not to win, you can still buy the book on Amazon.co.uk. You can buy it either in paperback or Kindle, and it's selling quite well at the moment. So do I was going to say go out and buy it, but you don't have to go out. You can just do it online because it's not in the shops. So go to Amazon.co.uk and buy either the Kindle or the paperback. I'd be very happy if you do that. A couple of other things. I mentioned the biscuit lemon puffs. I think it was in the last episode, because we did have a prolonged discussion about biscuits in one of the episodes in which my son Jamie suggested that fig rolls were an old man's biscuit. So I managed to get hold of some lemon puffs. And, sadly, I have to say that when I was a kid, they were one of my favourite biscuits, but they've skimped on the lemon filling a bit. It's not quite as good as it used to be. And my son Jamie, who suggested fig rolls or old man's biscuits, he was over here the other day, and I gave him one of the lemon puffs biscuits, and he wasn't impressed at all. But I didn't want to argue with him because the bastards have skimped on the filling, so I can't really blame. But he didn't sort of tell me whether he thought it was an old man's biscuits or a middle-aged man's biscuits or a young man's biscuits. But once again, if any of you have tried lemon puffs, let me know what you think. It's certainly not like they used to be. If any of you remember them from the old days, they're certainly not as good as they used to be, which is a bit of a shame. But it's been quite an exciting week for me on a number of counts because, number one, I went off to Northern Ireland to film some scenes from the Netflix series in which I'm going to be in. And I'll tell you all about that in greater detail later on in the episode in a few minutes. And secondly, it's been exciting for me because speaking about the book, I had an interview with the one and only Richard Herring on his podcast, RHLSTP. You can get it on RHLSTP on his book club side of his podcast, and it was a really great interview. I really enjoyed it, and it was great actually to sort of interact with another podcaster, because Richard, I think he was one of the first podcasters of all time. I think, well, certainly in Britain anyway. He was one of the first to do it, so it was nice to sort of chat to him and sort of get to know the feel of the whole thing and be part of the podcasting community, if you like. And it'd be nice to get some other podcasts to chat about them. So if there's any other podcasters listening, I'm available. And if you want to come on my podcast as well, that'd be great. So a bit of interaction would be fantastic. But I did have a great chat with Richard. We talked about my book, obviously, and not just about my book, but we talked about the book first. And how the book actually came about was it was originally a sitcom for BBC Radio 4, and you learn why it was actually well, it wasn't so much banned, but it was taken off the air because the commissioners had changed in between the recording of the series, and it was taken off the air, and that's how the book came about. But you'll hear about it in more detail on Richard's podcast. But we didn't just talk about my book; we talked about my early stand-up days in London, because Richard was around then. I think I'd been going a few years before he started. And a few other things like joke stealing. Many of you will be aware that Joe Pasquale stole my joke, "What are you doing in my garden?" on the national sort of command performance or whatever it was. And Richard's old mate Stuart Lee did a nice sort of lampooning of the whole thing. So you can also go into Stuart Lee on YouTube, and you can listen to him lampooning Joe Pasquale for ripping off my leg on the Royal Variety Command performance. That's what it was called. And we also talked about my podcast as well, and a few other things. So it's a good listen. So go on to RHLSTP, Richard's podcast, and have a listen. It was good fun. And also, many of you will be aware, it's supposed to be the 28th of July, so the Edinburgh Fringe is starting in, I think it's the 2nd of August. It's the 2nd of August, yeah. And we're going through on the 9th, and we'll be chatting to a few people, and because there's loads and loads of comedians there during the Fringe, and there's sort of two pinpointed that we're going to talk about, but you know, never know what happened. We sort of just wander around Edinburgh, and we see who we can interview. So do listen out for that. So I've mentioned already that it's been quite an exciting week for me, because I flew off to Belfast from Glasgow last Sunday to film a couple of days on the Netflix series I've mentioned. I wasn't filming on Sunday, I was filming on Monday and Tuesday. But it all started off pretty badly. Not the filming. It was I got a taxi, which they paid for, by the way. I haven't sort of suddenly come into loads of money, but I got a taxi to Glasgow Airport from my flat in Maryhill in Glasgow. And I hadn't really slept very well the night before, because it was quite an early flight, and as you know, I'm not really a very happy. I'm a bit of a nervous flyer, so if I got an early flight, I tend not to sleep very well. So I only slept for about a couple of hours, I think. So I wasn't really feeling on top of the world when the taxi arrived. But you know, you get these taxi drivers, they just want to just talk all the time, and they're just opinionated, and they know everything about everything. And I just wasn't really in the mood. I just wanted to sort of get in the taxi and close my eyes for half an hour or so, which is the length of the journey to Glasgow Airport from my flat. But he's one of these guys who just went on and on. The first thing he said was he started talking about the new COVID strain, and I said, "Hey, it's a shame," and all that. So I just shut him up. Then he said, "I'll tell you something else. There's no strain. There was never any virus. It's all a conspiracy. And as regards to the vaccine, that was just a placebo." And then he, at the end of everything he would say, he would just say, "Watch this space." Then he went on to say, "The banks have been ripping us off for years, haven't they? But I'll tell you something now, it's all going to come toppling down on them in the next month or so. Watch this space. Putin is going to get assassinated before Christmas. I have a friend of a friend who works in the American embassy. So watch this space. Putin is going to die before the year is out." And it was all this sort of crap that I had to listen to. I didn't even respond. I just sat there, you know, with my eyes closed, but he still just kept going on and on and on, and watch this space. And it was kind of this, when we eventually got to Glasgow Airport, I kind of felt in my head, I could imagine my fingers circling his throat and throttling him down to shut up. But I managed to restrain myself. And that was, I said, started off badly. That was the only shit bit of the whole thing. So I got on a plane from Glasgow to Belfast. It wasn't Ryanair, believe it or not. It was EasyJet, who were, I suppose, kind of the same, really. I don't know, not much difference. But I didn't have to go through all that business of, of no baggage this or I want a seat here, because they'd already done that. So I didn't have to bother with all that nonsense. But we flew into Belfast City Airport, which is now called the George Best City Airport. And it kind of reminded me of George Best. I think was probably my only hero, I think, when I was growing up. Maybe some comedians, but George Best was my sort of football hero, because this was kind of late 60s, early 70s. And he was the first kind of magician I really saw playing football, I think, if you like, because I was really into football at the time. And I'm going to be quite controversial now. I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but as far as I'm concerned, George Best was the best ever footballer of all time. You can disagree if you like. Now, I know people would say, well, he only lasted about 3 or 4 years, which he did. Now, if financially, if you're sort of a big club nowadays, you wouldn't probably, if you had a choice between signing George Best or Messi or Ronaldo, you would sign Messi or Ronaldo because of the longevity. They've gone on for 10, 15 years, and George Best only really lasted about 4 or 5. But as far as I'm concerned, he was the most mesmerising footballer of all time. This could create a big argument. I don't know. Let me know what you think. I mean, some of you might get annoyed about it. I mean, I realise I'm not saying Messi and Ronaldo or, who's the other ones, Ronaldinho or Maradona for Argentina. They were all geniuses. I'm not suggesting they weren't, but I think George Best just had the slight edge. And also, if you look back at some of the YouTube clips of George Best, you can see that he was playing in not just a different era, but I mean, a lot of the pitches were muddy and there was big sort of leather balls in, but he still had this amazing skill. And I think probably one of the things that he's not so much recognised for is that if someone took the ball off him, unlike maybe Messi or Ronaldo, he wouldn't just sort of say, oh, fair enough. He always chased after them. Now, you probably wouldn't be allowed to do that now for tactics, I don't know, because maybe people like Messi and Ronaldo are told you have to stay in your position. But he would run from one end of the pitch to the other and just get the ball back off him. It was sort of his attitude was, this is my ball and you're not getting it. But let's open it up for discussion, or I was going to say argument, but no, a civilized discussion. Whether you think George Best was, in his time, for the short period he was there, I think he was the most mesmerising and brilliant footballer of all time. The most amazing skills. He just did a jink of his shoulder or a foot, and he had about 3 or 4 defenders slipping and going the wrong way. It was just amazing. But let us know what you think. Who's your favourite footballer? And if you give somebody, I'm sure will agree with me. And you don't have to be Irish. I'm not saying this because I'm Irish. I'm not saying George Best was the best player. I'm not that nationalistic. I'm not saying he was the best player because he was Irish, but I just thought he was a genius. It could be because maybe he was the first one I saw from my early days. I don't know. Sounds like the police are coming for us. Maybe this podcast isn't as good as I thought it was. But we flew into George Best. This was on Sunday, and I hadn't been to Belfast, I think, for about 5 or 6 years. But it's a really changed city now. It's become quite vibrant. I mean, it's I don't know, maybe since the Good Friday Agreement, they've got a lot of money or something from somewhere. Maybe it wouldn't be the European community, because they're not in the European community anymore, are they? Because they're part of Brexit. I think that pisses off a lot of them. But anyway, never mind. But it has become quite a vibrant city since the last time I was there. Lots of new hotels and restaurants and shops and that kind of thing. And of course, they have the Titanic Museum. It's only somewhere in Ireland you get a museum for something that was an enormous bloody failure. Because I think it was sort of, they said it was indestructible, I think, and it sunk on its first voyage to America with the iceberg and all that. But it's getting lots of tourists now. I just thought of it, that if the Titanic hadn't sunk, maybe Belfast would be quite empty. It wouldn't be vibrant anymore. There'd be no tourists there at all. But it's a totally changed city since the last time I was there. But I often thought to myself, any time I've been to Belfast, it's a strange feeling, because I grew up in Dublin during the so-called Troubles in the late 60s and the 70s. And even though Ireland is a small island, I mean, Dublin is only about 150 miles, I think, from Belfast. But it was kind of, you're almost, I don't mean you were detached emotionally because you saw people dying and all that. It's pretty bloody horrible. But physically, it was almost like it was in another country. It didn't sort of, impact that much on people in Dublin. Emotionally, yes, but not physically. It was like sort of a different country almost, which is weird. And I always got that feeling in Belfast. But I think since the Good Friday Agreement, or in the last few years, anyway, it all seems to have that sort of, the troubles seem to be all over, and it's just a normal city now. So I hope it stays like that. You didn't get any sort of sense of any kind of, I presume there is still some sectarianism there. There's even some sectarianism in in Glasgow. There's actually an orange lodge about 30 yards away from the crescent I live in, but they don't disturb me. They seem quite harmless. But yeah, I think it's all sort of petered out, which is good, and it's nice to see. Hopefully it'll stay that way for a long, long time, if not forever. So Sunday, I spent most of Sunday just sort of wandering about, and the first day's filming was on the following day, on Monday. And I got a lift from the hotel to what's called the unit base, which is where, you know, I'm becoming a bit showbiz now. We call it the unit base, which is where all the, you know, you get your makeup on and your outfit, whatever. I'm playing a Garda, which is a not Republican, a policeman from the Republic. The policemen in the north are called RUC. I'll explain why a bit more about that later. Yeah, so you go to this unit. What do I call it? A unit site? Forget what I call it. It's called a unit anyway. Where all the, it's not where you actually do the filming. It's where you get your makeup and costume and things like that. So you go there first, and I got my makeup on, and they gave me my costume, my Garda costume, and then you go into your trailer or Winnebago if you want to be a bit more showbiz. But it's basically just it is just a trailer with a little room and a toilet, and you're just sort of sitting there waiting to be driven to the location where you're filming. And that for me was the most nerve-wracking part, because you're just sitting there for maybe a couple of hours, and there's, you know, you can say you can read a book or go on your phone, but you're just thinking of, oh Christ, am I going to get the right words, or am I going to say them right, or will the director like me? Because I'll give you a comparison between this and Father Ted, because when I did Father Ted, I mean, I was pretty nervous, but I wasn't particularly nervous, because I already knew Dermot Morgan, you know, who was Father Ted. I knew him from my days in Dublin. We did some comedy stuff in Dublin, and we were kind of mates. He only lived a couple of miles from me in Dublin. And I also knew Art O'Hanlon, who played Dougal from the stand-up circuit. And I knew the producer, Jeffrey Perkins, who has since passed, and also the director, Declan Lowney, who worked with on a couple of stand-up things on television before. So I kind of knew the people. It wasn't, you know, I was quite comfortable when I went there. But this time, I didn't know who the director. I knew the director's name, but I'd never met him. I didn't know who the writer was. Or I did know who the writer was, but I hadn't met her or him. And I didn't know any of the actors, and some of them were, you know, quite famous. So I was a bit nervous, because I haven't done. I mean, I did Father Ted, and I've done a little bits of sort of film acting since then, but nothing really major. So I was quite nervous about the whole thing. So you're driven to the film location. The first day was only about 10 minutes outside Belfast, but it was set up as a Garda station in the south, because the whole thing is sort of filmed between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. But I'm playing a Garda, and the bit I'm in is sort of set in the Republic of Ireland, even though it's been filmed in the north of Ireland, if you know what I mean. So you're brought along to the film location, and I'm introduced to the director, who was really lovely and seemed really nice, and the writer, and met a few of the other actors. And they all seemed really nice as well. They're really supportive, and kind of, you know, I felt quite relaxed. But the difference between that and Father Ted, I mean, it was a world of difference, because I think in Father Ted it was a Channel 4 series. It's probably quite low budget, but this was almost like a Hollywood blockbuster. So I think in Father Ted there was about 9 or 10 crew. For this one, when we arrived at the location, there seemed to be just it seemed like hundreds of people. I don't think there was, probably about 50 or 60, but loads of different people, loads of different sort of cameras, and these sort of tracks where you could run the cameras along, and people walking and talking around, and walking and talking in walkie-talkies, and it was quite exciting, but also quite nerve-wracking as well. But I went into where we were going to film the scene, the first scene, and I kind of had a few ideas in my head what I was going to. I got the script obviously, but I wanted to kind of muck around with it a little bit. And I said to the director, "Would it be okay to, you know, just put a little bit of my own stuff in?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "It's fine by me, but you'd better ask the writer who was standing beside me." So I asked the writer, and the writer said, "Yeah, just go with what you feel like." And because I really like your stuff. And I don't know where the writer liked my stuff from. I don't know whether it was because of Father Stone and Father Ted, or they'd seen my stand-up. Sorry, my producer's saying something to me. I don't know what he's saying. Or even my podcast, yes, they probably heard. Maybe they never even heard of Father Stone or my stand-up. It was just purely the podcast. But yeah, so that kind of helped me relax a bit. But it was still quite nerve-wracking, because when you're doing the rehearsal, there was it's not just you and the other actors. All the crew seemed to be standing around. They probably wanted to see, how somebody who's just come out, because they'd already been filming for 2 weeks, so they probably wanted to see how the newbie was going to deliver his lines. But I threw in a few stuff of my own. I didn't have to. You can't really change, because I was interacting with somebody else who was a police woman. She was quite a young woman in the series, and so you can't really change the line you finish on, because they come in on something else, if you know what I mean. So, but I was able to muck around in the middle of what I was saying, and so we did a rehearsal, and it got a big laugh. You got a few good laughs, the bits that I'd put in, which was really great. And even at that stage, after we'd done the rehearsal, the writer came up to me and said, I'm going to put in a few more bits of dialogue for you. So I took that as a compliment. Maybe she just thought what I said was too short and shit, but I think it was a compliment anyway. So I got a few more lines. So that was the rehearsal done with, and then they kind of you take a break while they set up the technical cameras and the sound and all that kind of thing. Now the thing is about this, I'd forgotten about filming that. What I filmed is probably what come out is about 3 minutes in the whole series, but you're actually filming for 6 hours. Now this is not because any of us screwed up our lines or anything like that, or because the cameraman screwed up. It was just the technicalities. I'll try and explain the sort of logistics of it. I just have a drink of water, if you excuse me. You do the first take, if you like. There was 3 actors sitting across from me, and I was delivering lines to them. So they filmed me, just on me, not on them, first, delivering my lines to them. So you do that a few times so they get it exactly right. Then they have to film from behind me, delivering the same lines again. You have to keep saying the same lines again. Then it changes over to the camera pointing at the 3 people I was talking to get their reaction to what I'm saying, and also then whatever they're saying to me, you have to come back again to see what my reaction is to what I'm saying to them. And so you have about, it's not so much 10 takes that you fucked up, but technically it has to be that amount of time, because you're filming from behind and front and all that kind of thing. And I think it probably took about 5 hours in the end. And by the time you've done it, sort of the lines about 15 times, you just think, is this really funny anymore? Because everybody stopped laughing at this stage because they've already laughed. It's kind of like if you're doing stand-up and you're coming on and do your opening gag and then go off and then do your opening gag again and go off again and off again. People have stopped laughing. So it's a little bit unnerving, but you knew that initially they laughed, so you just sort of carry on. And I didn't, I think I fluffed my lines once, but it was only when I was sort of giving the other actors their sort of cue, so it didn't really matter that much. So the first day went off really well, and I really enjoyed it. It was nice to get it over with, because I said I was nervous. I was actually probably petrified, really, thinking back. But I think I'm looking that when I am that really nervous, people don't think I'm nervous, because I know when I used to stand up, I wasn't petrified, after a few years, but I was always nervous, and people always say to me, how come you're not nervous before you go on? But I just know one of those people who shows that inside I was always nervous. So I don't think I showed that I was nervous on the set. So we had a really good day, and it finished about 11:30 at night, so couldn't really go out for a drink with any of the other cast, and everybody just went back to their lodgings or hotel or things like that. I was staying in a lovely hotel, but I won't mention it in case I'm not allowed to, but it was a really nice hotel in the centre of Belfast. And I had good sleep. The call for the next morning was it was 11 o'clock. I was picked up at 11 o'clock. I brought to the unit base again to get my makeup and costume on and that kind of thing, and sit in the Winnebago. And the makeup is really strange, because they they sort of do your eyebrows and things like that. It's like sort of being pampered in a hairdresser's, which I've never happened to me before. But once again, this was different though, because day 2 we weren't filming in where the Garda station, the makeup Garda station was. I should explain a little bit more about the Garda thing. I say I was playing a Garda who was based in the Republic of Ireland, but we were filming in the north of Ireland. But you had to get all the stuff. We were filming in the second day in a place called Ardglass, which is about it's about a mile outside Belfast. There's a lovely little harbour area. But you have to sort of take all the stuff. You have to obviously you have to get all the actors, all the equipment, all the crew. But there was 2 Garda cars involved in the scene we were doing this day. So you have to drive the Garda cars from Belfast to where we were filming. So there's basically, despite the Good Friday Agreement, there was Garda cars passing through towns in Northern Ireland. You could see people looking up thinking, fuck, are we, as the Good Friday Agreement gone to pot and we're being invaded from the south. They were definitely looking very strangely at the Garda cars passing through their town. But it was a lovely sort of a location because it was this place called Ardglass, and it was a really sunny day as well. It was a nice little harbour. But the scene I was playing was there was a storm in the scene, a rainstorm, a serious rainstorm in the scene. And it was fine in the afternoon because it was a really sunny day. And I'll just tell you a little bit how they got the rain, because they probably were hoping that it would be actually a rainy day, because Northern Ireland isn't much different than Scotland. It still gets a lot of rain, but it was a glorious sunny day, like it is in Glasgow today, one of the odd ones. But so they had to, fake rain, but they were obviously prepared for it because they had these. I don't know what the technical name for them, but there were these sort of long poles, thin sort of poles with a nozzle at the top, and they went up to about 40 feet in the air. They obviously, some power thing, they shoved the water to them some way, and then they had about 4 or 5 of them over our heads, and the rain just comes pouring down. And it was fine in the afternoon because I had this Garda outfit, and it was about 10 fucking layers. I mean, I even had a bulletproof vest, and I don't know why, because you couldn't see the bulletproof vest, and unless they thought maybe somebody might just take a pot of this when they saw the Garda outfit. So I was really boiling in the afternoon, and it was lovely having the rain sort of pouring down on you. It was actually a relief. But that was the first scene. It was just kind of, I think it was just stopping a car or something like that. But in the second scene, which came, because I had to do another couple of scenes in between that before I did my final scene of the evening, which was in the evening. It was about 7 or 8 o'clock by the time we got around to doing the final scene. But it was still obviously in a storm, and at this stage the sun had gone down, and being Northern Hemisphere, was getting pretty bloody cold. But we still had to have the rain pissing down on us, and it took a little bit longer because once again, none of us fluffed our lines or any of that, but it was more the logistics of it, because there was Garda cars involved, and there was roadblocks involved, and I had to keep moving back and forth and all that. So it took about sort of 10 takes to get it right, and then you'd get the rain coming down on you, and even though you were zipped up with a jacket, it still sort of managed to get down the back of my neck, and I was fucking saturated. But it still went very well. I mean, I'm not complaining. I mean, there are a lot worse jobs than just standing in a nice harbour area getting wet. So, but it was pretty hard going for the second scene. But it all went very well. And once again, I did a little bit of improvisation, and the director seemed to like it. And it made me think back to Father Ted when I had that rain coming down on me. I don't think they used equipment that time. I think it was actually pissing rain. We didn't have to simulate it. But and we got really wet because it was in a priest outfit. I couldn't sort of wear a raincoat or anything like that. But there was no towels on the Father Ted set. I had to go to someone's house to clean up. This was a lot more sort of professional. They had towels for us to dry out and all that. So it all worked out very well, and I'm really looking forward to going back again. So far so good. That's only 2 days filming. I think I'm going back again. It was on the 20th or the 22nd of August to do another week of filming, and then there's some more again in September and October, and I'll tell you all more about that when it happens. Now, I've already mentioned the Netflix series which I'm filming on, and that is the reason we're only going out every 2 weeks for the next couple of months. We had been doing it weekly up to then, but I think the filming probably finish late September, early October, and after that we got back to the weekly episodes as we were doing before. But for the time being, it's just every 2 weeks. Now, in this section, for the last 2 episodes, I've featured some of my favourite comedians. I've already featured the Geordie comedian Gavin Webster, and also the one and only Scottish comedian Jerry Sadowitz. This week I'm going to centre on an American comedian called Steven Wright. Some of you may already be familiar with him, some of you may not. But the reason I want to talk about Steven Wright is that he was really my inspiration for doing stand-up. I mean, my initial inspiration for comedy was probably, you know, The Goon Show and Monty Python and the Marx Brothers. But as regards pure stand-up, Steven Wright, when I saw him, was the one person that kind of made me feel, you know, maybe I could do that. I'm not saying I can do it as well as Steven Wright did, but that was my kind of where I thought I could actually do that, because I may have mentioned before that I thought stand-up was kind of, you know, you had to be really out there, like Billy Connolly, that sort of, you know, storyteller, and you couldn't really just do one-liners, which Steven Wright does. But I saw him on a show. It was actually presented by Bob Monkhouse. Now, a lot of people think, you know, Bob Monkhouse just sort of a smarmy TV presenter, game show host, and all that kind of thing. But he did start off as a comedian, and he wrote loads and loads of brilliant gags. He wrote for other comedians like Bob Hope and a few others, I think. But he was a great gag writer. I mean, he wrote some brilliant gags. I think a couple that come to mind. He said, when I told everybody at first that I was going to become a comedian, everybody laughed. They're not laughing now. And another one of his great gags, he says, it wasn't actually that long before he died, I think. He said, I'm not in the least bit afraid of dying. What I'm afraid of is that bit afterwards where rigor mortis sets in and you get all cold and stiff. That's the bit I'm not looking forward to. But anyway, that's just an aside. He had this show, I think it was probably the mid-'80s on BBC. And he used to bring over these American comedians. And Emo Phillips, who was on it as well, you might know Emo Phillips. He had a great gag as well. I won't feature him, but he had a great gag. He said, I had an asthmatic attack the other day. These two asthmatics jumped out of a bush and attacked me. But anyway, Steven Wright was similar. He's a very sort of droll delivery, which I suppose I kind of do as well. But I saw him on the Bob Monkhouse show, and I thought, yeah, Jesus, maybe I could actually be a stand-up comedian, because I didn't think before that, I didn't think, you know, that was something I would do. I didn't think it was kind of for me, because I thought you had to be, as I say, like, you know, a Billy Connolly type out there. And I saw Steven Wright on this show, and I thought, yeah, maybe I can do that. And he has some brilliant gags. I mean, I'll give you an example of some of his gags. He said, I'd really kill for a Nobel Peace Prize. He says, the other day I bought a humidifier and a dehumidifier, and I put them both on at the same time and let them sort of fight it out between them. He said, he has a friend who's a DJ. He says, anytime they're in a car together and they go under a tunnel, you can't hear what the DJ is saying. And there's just, he has about 1,000 of these gags, and one of his gags said, hey, what if there was no such thing as gravity and birds die, they just stay up there? It just goes, I mean, I think he probably was one of those prolific writers that you could imagine. I don't know, I think he is still doing stand-up, but the problem with, not the problem with Steven Wright, but the problem with doing sort of one-liners is that, one-liner after another, is that the audience tend to get laughed out, because I won't mention the comedian's name, but there's another comedian in Britain who does one-liners, and he was on my show, the Sunday Service at the Stand, which I did for 20 years. And he was just doing 20 minutes, but there was a friend of mine in the audience who loved him, who thought he was brilliant, but she said after the show, after about 13 minutes, she was just laughed out. Even though the other 7 minutes was just as good as the previous 13, she just got laughed out. And I think that's the problem with doing one-liners. And that's the problem I had when I started doing stand-up, was that it was just one-liner after one-liner, and you can't really do a big concert. You can't do an hour or an hour and a half just doing one-liners, because the audience will just get laughed out. I think that's probably, Steven Wright had that problem as well, because I don't think he ever really did sort of big concerts around the place. He's still doing gigs, I think, around the place, but not sort of big sort of concert halls, as it were, because you can't just do one-liners one after another for an hour and a half. Usually, I think maybe 30 minutes is enough, really, even though the rest of the material may be just as good. But he's also written a book, Steven Wright, called Harold. Obviously not as good as my book, but which I will mention once again. It's on Richard's podcast. But yeah, his book is called Harold, but I'm sure it's brilliant. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm sure it's brilliant. Whether or not it's as good as mine. But we're actually speaking to Richard. I did mention that. He mentioned about Steven Wright, and he said he's written a book as well, and it's not dissimilar to Eamon, Older Brother of Jesus. It's not set in biblical times, but it's kind of the same kind of tone to it, I think. So I would advise you to go on YouTube and listen to some of Steven Wright's stuff, because it is genius. Every line he says is genius. Probably almost too good. That's why the audience just get laughed out. But yeah, go on YouTube and listen to some of his stuff. It is brilliant. So and buy his book as well. But buy my book first. But once again, it was great fun talking to Richard on his podcast, and we'll be putting the is the website, not the website, the link, that's the word for it, the link to the interview on the podcast at the end of the show. So do have a listen, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time, because we're going to Edinburgh on the 9th of August. And I mentioned the Edinburgh Fringe already, and we're going to be wandering around Edinburgh. We have 2 comedians pinpointed that we're going to talk to them. I talk about them afterwards. I don't know, see how the interview goes or the chat goes. But we'll be just sort of wandering around Edinburgh, around the Fringe, and sort of taking in the whole atmosphere of the place, and maybe interviewing just impromptu people that seem interesting. We don't know. So do listen out for that, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Once again, thanks for listening, and don't forget to listen to Richard's podcast as well. Thanks, and all the best, and do buy my book. Cheers, bye-bye.